The Dutch West India Company, or WIC, was born in a time of great ambition. In 1621, the States General of the Netherlands granted it a charter. This was not merely a business plan. It was a declaration of intent. The Netherlands was locked in a long, bitter struggle with Spain, the 80 Years' War. The WIC was designed to be a weapon in that war. Its goal was to attack the vast Spanish and Portuguese empires in the Americas. It would disrupt their trade, seize their silver-laden ships, and capture their valuable colonies. This was a company built for conflict, a corporation with its own navy and army, ready to project Dutch power across the Atlantic Ocean and into the heart of the New World. Early on, this aggressive strategy paid off handsomely. The company's ships were like wolves among a flock of sheep. They preyed on the shipping lanes that connected the Iberian Peninsula to its colonial treasures. The most famous success came in 1628, when Admiral Piet Hein captured the Spanish treasure fleet in Matanzas Bay, off the coast of Cuba. This single act brought an immense fortune back to Amsterdam. The captured silver and goods were enough to fund the Dutch army for months and pay a huge dividend to the company's shareholders. This spectacular victory created a wave of excitement and investment, making the WIC seem like an unstoppable force, a golden ticket to wealth and national glory. The company's ambitions were not limited to piracy, however grand the scale. It sought to build its own empire. The WIC established colonies and trading posts along the coasts of North and South America and West Africa. It founded New Netherland, with its capital at New Amsterdam on Manhattan Island, a place that would one day become New York City. It seized control of valuable trading posts in Africa, essential for its later ventures. But its greatest prize was in South America. The company targeted the sugar-producing regions of Portuguese Brazil, seeing them as a source of incredible wealth that could be wrestled away from its enemies. The WIC was a hybrid entity, part military machine and part trading conglomerate. This dual identity, however, contained the seeds of its future problems. The constant state of war was incredibly expensive. Maintaining fleets, paying soldiers, and administering distant, often hostile territories drained the company's coffers almost as quickly as Piet Hein could fill them. The focus on military conquest often overshadowed the more mundane, but ultimately more sustainable, work of building stable trade relationships and profitable colonies. The early victories created an expectation of quick, spectacular profits, but empire building was a slow, costly business. The WIC's foundation, built on the spoils of war, repeatedly overstayed within the solid ground of earthly powers that the Dutch East India Company enjoyed. The fortress was strong, but the price of its empire was wealth. The greatest venture of the first Dutch West India Company was its conquest of Brazil. In the 1630s, the WIC successfully invaded and occupied the northeastern coast of the Portuguese colony. This region was the world's leading producer of sugar, a commodity so valuable it was called white gold. The company took control of the vast sugar plantations and the lucrative trade routes that carried the sweet crystals back to Europe. For a time, Dutch Brazil, or New Holland as it was called, seemed like a crowning achievement. The company appointed Johan Maurits van Nassau-Siegen as its governor-general, a man of vision who promoted religious tolerance and scientific exploration, bringing a brief golden age to the colony. Under Maurits's leadership, the capital city of Recife flourished. He built new towns, bridges, and palaces, attracting artists and scientists to document the wonders of this new tropical territory. The WIC poured enormous resources into Brazil, believing that the profits from sugar would justify the expense. The company controlled the entire production chain, from the plantations, which relied on the brutal labor of enslaved Africans, to the refineries in the Netherlands. For a few years, the gamble seemed to be working. Dutch Brazil became the heart of the WIC's Atlantic Empire, a symbol of its power to challenge and displace the old Iberian colonial giants. The company's directors in Amsterdam dreamed of a permanent Dutch presence in South America. However, the occupation of Brazil was never secure. The Portuguese colonists who lived there were not happy under Dutch rule. They remained loyal to Portugal and resented the Protestant newcomers. They launched a persistent guerrilla war, emerging from the hinterlands to attack Dutch garrisons and sugar mills. This insurgency was a constant drain on the WIC's military and financial resources. The company had to maintain a large and expensive army just to hold on to its territory. At the same time, Portugal regained its independence from Spain in 1640, which changed the political landscape. The Dutch government, seeking an alliance with the newly independent Portugal against their common enemy, Spain, became less enthusiastic about a costly war in Brazil. The final blow came in 1654. After years of relentless fighting, the Portuguese forces, supported by local planters, finally drove the Dutch out of Brazil. The loss was a catastrophic disaster for the Dutch West India Company. It had invested millions of guilders in the Brazilian adventure, and now it had nothing to show for it but massive debts. The dream of a sugar empire had turned into a financial nightmare. The fall of Dutch Brazil marked the beginning of the end for the First WIC. The company never recovered from this immense financial loss. It had gambled everything on Brazil and lost, leaving it weakened, indebted, and struggling for survival in an increasingly competitive Atlantic world.
The loss of Dutch Brazil sent the First Dutch West India Company into a terminal decline. The company was now saddled with monumental debts, the result of years of expensive military campaigns and the abrupt loss of its most valuable asset. Shareholders who had once celebrated the capture of the Spanish silver fleet now saw their investments evaporate. The company's credit collapsed, and it found it nearly impossible to raise new capital. The confidence that had once surrounded the WIC was gone, replaced by a sense of failure and financial ruin. Its remaining territories, such as New Netherland and a few forts in West Africa, did not generate enough revenue to cover its enormous liabilities. The company tried to stay afloat, but its problems were too deep. Its military purpose had also become less clear. The 80 Years' War with Spain ended with the Peace of Westphalia in 1648. This meant the WIC could no longer justify its existence as a state-sponsored tool of war. Its primary function, to harm the Spanish and Portuguese empires, was now obsolete. Without the context of a national war, the company's privateering activities looked more like simple piracy, and its military structure was an unjustifiable expense. It was forced to compete on purely commercial terms, a role for which its militant organization was poorly suited. Furthermore, the company struggled to manage its remaining colonies effectively. In 1664, during the Second Anglo-Dutch War, the English captured New Netherland with little resistance. The colony, including its capital New Amsterdam, was renamed New York. Although the Dutch would briefly recapture it, they ultimately traded it away for Suriname in the final peace treaty. This loss, while not as financially devastating as Brazil, was another blow to the company's prestige and power. The WIC was shrinking, losing territory and influence year by year. It was clear that the original model of a militarized trading company was no longer viable in the changing Atlantic world. Finally, in 1674, the inevitable happened. The First Dutch West India Company declared bankruptcy. Its debts were simply too large to overcome. The States General, the Dutch government that had created the company 53 years earlier, officially dissolved it. The grand experiment had failed. The dream of a powerful Dutch empire in the Americas, built on military conquest and colonial exploitation, had crumbled under the weight of its own costs and strategic miscalculations. The story of the First WIC was over, but the Dutch desire for a stake in the Atlantic trade was not. A new, more focused organization would soon rise from its ashes.
The bankruptcy of the First WIC in 1674 did not mark the end of Dutch commercial ambitions in the Atlantic. The company's infrastructure, though dilapidated, still existed. It held valuable trading forts on the coast of West Africa and colonies in the Caribbean, such as Curaçao and St. Eustatius. The Dutch government and merchant class recognized that there was still money to be made in the Atlantic, but a new approach was needed. The old model of a quasi-military state, waging expensive wars and trying to govern vast territories, had proven to be a failure. A leaner, more commercially focused entity was required to take its place and salvage what remained. Therefore, almost immediately after the first company was dissolved, a second Dutch West India Company was chartered in 1675. This new organization was a reorganization, not a completely new creation. It took over the remaining assets of its predecessor, including its forts, ships, and colonial possessions. However, its mandate was fundamentally different. The States General stripped the Second WIC of its military and territorial ambitions. Its charter explicitly forbade it from engaging in the kind of large-scale military conquest that had bankrupted the first company. The focus was to be exclusively on trade. The Second WIC was a commercial enterprise in its purest form. Its primary purpose was to manage and profit from the territories it inherited, and to facilitate trade between Africa, the Americas, and Europe. This meant abandoning the costly dream of a land-based empire like Dutch Brazil. Instead, the company would concentrate on what it could do profitably, managing its trading posts and overseeing the flow of goods. This shift in strategy reflected a harsh lesson learned. The spectacular but risky ventures were replaced by a more sober, calculated approach to commerce. The goal was no longer to conquer empires, but to control the lucrative trade routes that connected them. This new focus led the Second WIC down a much darker path. With its territorial ambitions gone, the company turned its full attention to the most profitable trade available in the 17th century Atlantic, the trade in human beings. The First WIC had already been involved in the slave trade, primarily to supply laborers for its Brazilian sugar plantations. But for the Second WIC, the Atlantic slave trade would become its central business. The new charter effectively transformed the company from a colonial conqueror into the primary Dutch agent of the transatlantic slave trade, a grim new purpose that would define its existence for the next century.
The Second Dutch West India Company became synonymous with the Atlantic slave trade. This brutal commerce formed the core of its business model. The company perfected a grimly efficient system known as the triangular trade. Dutch ships would depart from ports in the Netherlands, filled with goods like textiles, brandy, and guns. They sailed to the company's forts along the Gold Coast of West Africa, in modern-day Ghana. The most important of these was Elmina Castle, a massive fortress that served as a headquarters and a holding pen for captured Africans. Here, the Dutch goods were traded for human beings who had been captured in the African interior and brought to the coast. From West Africa, the company's ships embarked on the horrific Middle Passage, the journey across the Atlantic to the Americas. Men, women, and children were packed into the dark, suffocating holds of the slave ships. The conditions were appalling, and disease, malnutrition, and despair caused a shockingly high death rate. Those who survived the journey were taken to the company's primary slave markets in the Caribbean. The island of Curaçao, with its large natural harbor, became the main Dutch slave depot in the Americas. Here, the enslaved Africans were sold to plantation owners from across the Caribbean and the Spanish mainland, who needed labor for their sugar, tobacco, and coffee plantations. After selling their human cargo, the ships were loaded with colonial products, primarily sugar, molasses, and coffee. They then sailed back to the Netherlands, completing the third leg of the triangle. The profits from the sugar and other goods were then used to fund the next voyage. This cycle of trade was brutally effective and highly profitable for a time. The Second WIC held a monopoly on the Dutch slave trade for many years, meaning that it was the only Dutch company legally allowed to transport enslaved people from Africa. This monopoly gave it immense power and made it a central player in the 18th century Atlantic economy, an economy built on the foundation of forced labor. The company's operations were vast. It is estimated that the Dutch transported over 500,000 Africans across the Atlantic, and the WIC was responsible for a significant portion of that total, especially in the late 17th
and early 18th centuries. Its forts in Africa, like Elmina, Axum, and Shama, were essential nodes in this network of human trafficking. Its colonies in the Caribbean, like Curaçao, St. Eustatius, and Suriname, were both markets for enslaved people and producers of slave-made goods. The entire structure of the Second WIC was built around the buying, transporting, and selling of human beings, a dark legacy that profoundly shaped the history of Africa, the Americas, and the Netherlands itself. Despite its central role in the slave trade, the Second Dutch West India Company was plagued by persistent internal and external problems. One of the most significant issues was corruption. The company's employees, stationed thousands of miles from the watchful eyes of their directors in Amsterdam, often used their positions for personal gain. Company officials in West Africa and the Caribbean engaged in illicit private trading, using the WIC's ships and infrastructure to run their own side businesses. They would smuggle goods and even enslaved people, pocketing the profits that should have gone to the company. This culture of corruption ate away at the company's revenues from the inside. This internal rot was made worse by external competition. The WIC's monopoly on the Atlantic trade was difficult to enforce. The vastness of the ocean and the many coves and harbors of the Americas made it easy for private traders, known as interlopers or smugglers, to operate outside the company's control. These private merchants, both Dutch and foreign, could often operate more efficiently than the large bureaucratic WIC. They did not have the overhead costs of maintaining forts and administrative staff, so they could offer better prices for colonial goods and sell enslaved people for less. The island of St. Eustatius, a WIC colony, ironically became a major hub for this kind of smuggling, earning the nickname the Golden Rock. The company's directors in the Netherlands tried to crack down on both corruption and smuggling, but they had limited success. Communications were slow, and enforcement was nearly impossible over such great distances. The allure of quick profits was too strong for many employees and private traders to resist. As the 18th century progressed, the volume of this illicit trade grew, steadily eroding the WIC's market share and profitability. The company was constantly fighting a losing battle against 1,000 smaller, more agile competitors who chipped away at its monopoly. In the 1730s, the pressure from these private merchants became too great to ignore. The Dutch merchant class argued that the WIC's monopoly was inefficient and stifled economic growth. They lobbied the government to open up the trade to private individuals. Bowing to this pressure, the States General eventually abolished the WIC's monopoly on the slave trade. The company was forced to compete on the open market, and it struggled to do so. Its large, expensive bureaucracy could not match the flexibility and lower costs of the private slavers. The loss of its monopoly was a major blow, accelerating the company's long, slow decline. After losing its monopoly, the Second Dutch West India Company entered a state of irreversible decline. The company's profits, which had already been weakened by corruption and smuggling, began to bleed away at an alarming rate. It was now just one player among many in the brutal Atlantic marketplace it had once dominated. Private traders, unburdened by the costs of maintaining forts and colonial governments, consistently outcompeted the WIC. The company found itself in a paradoxical situation. It was still responsible for the expensive administration of its colonies and African forts, but it no longer enjoyed the exclusive trading rights that were supposed to pay for them. The company's financial statements from the mid-18th century tell a story of diminishing returns. Year after year, revenues fell while administrative costs remained high. The forts in West Africa, which were essential for the slave trade, were expensive to maintain and defend. The colonial governments in the Caribbean also required funding. The WIC tried to raise money by levying taxes and fees on the private traders who now used its ports, but this was never enough to cover the shortfall. The company was slowly but surely going broke, a victim of the very free market competition that its critics had advocated for. The political and economic climate was also turning against the company. The Fourth Anglo-Dutch War, from 1780 to 1784, was a disaster for the Netherlands and for the WIC. The powerful British Royal Navy blockaded Dutch ports and seized many of its colonies, including St. Eustatius, the smuggling hub that had been a source of indirect income. The war crippled what was left of the company's trade and pushed it to the brink of collapse. By the end of the war, the Second WIC was effectively insolvent, kept alive only by emergency loans from the Dutch government, which was reluctant to let such a historically significant institution fail completely. However, propping up a failing company could not go on forever. By the 1780s, it was clear to everyone that the WIC was a relic of a bygone era. Its business model was broken, its debts were insurmountable, and its purpose was unclear. The company that had once challenged empires and controlled the flow of wealth across the Atlantic was now a hollow shell, dependent on government handouts for its survival. Its slow financial death was a drawn-out and painful process, reflecting the changing realities of global trade and the decline of the old chartered companies. The end was near. By 1790, the Dutch West India Company was a company in name only. It was bankrupt, its trade had dwindled to almost nothing, and its remaining assets were a liability rather than a source of income. The intellectual currents of the late 18th century, including the rise of Enlightenment ideas about liberty and the growing abolitionist movement, were also turning against the very foundation of the company's business, the slave trade. The WIC was not just a financial failure, it was becoming a moral and political embarrassment. The Dutch government, itself undergoing major political upheaval inspired by the French Revolution, could no longer justify the company's existence. The decision was finally made. On January 1, 1792, the charter of the Second Dutch West India Company expired and was not renewed by the States General. The company was formally dissolved. Its debts, which were massive, were taken over by the Dutch government. Its territorial possessions, the forts in West Africa and the colonies in the Caribbean and South America, like Suriname, were also transferred to direct state control. The era of the great chartered companies, which had once been the primary engines of European colonialism, was coming to a close. The WIC, once a titan of the Atlantic, ceased to exist. The dissolution of the company was not a dramatic event, but the quiet end to a long and painful decline. There were no great battles or momentous surrenders. It was an administrative act, a recognition that the company had outlived its usefulness. For the people living in the WIC's former territories, the change was at first minimal. The colonial administration in places like Curaçao and Suriname simply changed flags, from the company's banner to that of the Dutch state. The brutal systems of plantation slavery that the company had managed and profited from continued under direct government rule for many decades to come. The end of the WIC marked a significant shift in the nature of colonialism. The model of delegating imperial expansion and administration to private, for-profit companies was replaced by direct state-run imperialism. Governments were now taking full responsibility for the management of their overseas empires. The demise of the WIC was a symbol of this transition. The company's 170-year history, from its aggressive military beginnings to its long, slow decay as a slave-trading enterprise, had finally run its course. The Atlantic world it had helped to create, however, would bear its mark for centuries.
The Dutch West India Company may have disappeared over 2 centuries ago, but its legacy is etched into the geography and culture of the modern world. Perhaps its most famous legacy is New York City. The company founded the settlement of New Amsterdam on the southern tip of Manhattan Island in 1625. The street plan of Lower Manhattan still follows the original Dutch layout. Names like Wall Street, from the Dutch de Walstraat, where a defensive wall once stood, Broadway, from de Breedweg, and Bowery, from Bowerij, the Dutch word for farm, are direct echoes of the WIC's time. The company's policy of tolerance, designed to attract settlers, helped create the diverse, multi-ethnic character that defines the city to this day. In the Caribbean and South America, the legacy is equally profound, but often more painful. The company's activities permanently shaped the demographics and culture of places like Suriname, Curaçao, and St. Eustatius. The Dutch language is still spoken, and the architecture of cities like Willemstad in Curaçao, with its colorful Dutch-style buildings, is a direct inheritance from the colonial era. More importantly, the WIC was the instrument that brought hundreds of thousands of enslaved Africans to these lands. The vibrant Afro-Caribbean cultures that developed there, as well as the enduring social and economic inequalities, are a direct consequence of the slave trade that the company managed. The WIC's history offers a stark lesson on the nature of colonial capitalism. It demonstrates the immense risks and moral compromises inherent in a system that blends state power with corporate profit-seeking. The company was created to enrich its shareholders and strengthen the Dutch state, and it pursued these goals with ruthless efficiency. It saw continents as resources to be exploited and people as commodities to be traded. The pursuit of profit led directly to violent conquest, mass enslavement, and the creation of colonial societies built on brutal inequality. The company's eventual bankruptcy shows that this model, even on its own terms, was often unsustainable. The immense human cost was matched by immense financial risk. Reflecting on the WIC story from our vantage point today, on November 3, 2025, forces us to confront the complex origins of our interconnected world. The wealth that flowed into Europe during the colonial era, the wealth that built cities like Amsterdam, was extracted at a terrible human cost. The multicultural societies of the Americas were forged in the crucible of conquest and slavery. The rise and fall of the Dutch West India Company is more than just a piece of business history. It is a story about the birth of the modern global economy, the enduring impacts of colonialism, and the deep-seated inequalities that continue to shape our world. Its ghosts still haunt the Atlantic,